Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined in person by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello everybody! We are at Midgardsblot, and we're sitting here with Tim Nancarrow, who is a PhD student at the University of Newcastle in Australia.
Yes.
Yeah,
I've come a very
not the
long
other
way.
one. And he is also a ritual specialist who does suspension rituals and a bunch of other funky things. So we are very happy to talk to you, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's very, very privileged. Feel very honoured to be asked to come along.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I'd just be, swanning around, getting up to mischief. So.
I'm sure you'll be up to that tonight.
Absolutely.
Mathias, say where we're sat.
Well, yeah, so we are sitting on one of the mounds at Borra in Norway, southern Norway. This is one of the most awesome historical locations for Viking Age. Anything that you could be at, very sacred site. This is amazing to be here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to be sat on one of the mounds where I don't know what was found in here. A ship, I'm hoping. Things. It's cool stuff, I guess.
Dead Vikings and all their stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
So really like a location for kings. Like you can see the mounds. They're incredibly big compared to a lot of other Viking Age mounds that you see out there in the landscape. So this was a really important location.
And I guess the one just over there, though we can't see, that looks like a rock mound, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Nice contrast.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the difference between some of the mounds are that some are earth mounds and some are rock burials where they just pile a bunch of rocks on.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a way to build a mound, right?
With the contrast different.
Yes, but a little, not so far away from here is also the location Skiringsal, which was a local magnate's estate, essentially. We don't know exactly if you can call him a king or a chieftain or whatever, but they had built a huge Viking hall with burial mounds on the side of the road. There was a little shipping port and everything, and it was an incredibly important location too in the Viking Age. So yeah, we are definitely
in
good company here.
I mean, let's talk about the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. That's why you're here. That's why we're sat here, because this thing fascinates me. So when I saw on the program, I guess, that you're gonna sacrifice yourself from a tree, obviously Odin comes to mind, that whole story. I guess, what is the sacrifice to start with? What are you going to be doing specifically? Let's start there rather than
All right. So the ritual is comprised of 3 different rites. So initially there's a warding rite. So going through Islendinga saga and Fornalda saga. So saga literature particularly, and then some of the stuff out of Eddic Vedi, so Eddic poetry. Looking at all of the, like the different little snippets when they talk about ritual practices being carried out. So Greenlandinga saga, the seeress comes to the farmstead, comes to the settlement, the property, and she's raised up high, kind of, a little bit of like a recurrent motif of continuity if you go back to Gylfaginning. So there's high, just as high, most high. It's the sort of the 3 stages of Odin playing the trick on Gylfi, the Swedish king. So she's up high. She's got animal pelts, hides, things like that. And she calls upon the owners of the farmstead and says, you need a local girl that's been schooled in like the old way that can perform the chants. And so these chants are using sound, music, using invocation to try and create like a warding barrier. So as with a lot of Odinic things and the pursuit of arcane knowledge, you're trying to access a liminal space, and a lot of the time it's either knowledge from the Jotnar, the giants, or it's knowledge from the dead, that which we as living mortal people, for whatever reason, we're not allowed to know it. So to try and create the right sort of space where you can access that, there's obviously certain dangers that are inherent. And my perspective from a lot of the, like these descriptions of different rituals, the dead are often the harbingers of this secret knowledge. Same saga when, the lass's name escapes me, but it's one of the sons, one of the sons of Edith the Red.
No, right?
Yeah.
And when he dies, it's when like a plague goes through the village, and a couple of people die. Yeah. So he falls ill and basically carks it. And then his body gets up again and goes to his wife and says, you will be long-lived and you will move to Iceland and you'll have, this wonderful family and all of this stuff. And she's, up until that point of revelation, she's quite concerned, and she goes to one of the other males there, one of the other warriors, and says, look, he's up and around and he's trying to talk to me, and I don't want to go into the other room. There's this trepidation about engaging with the dead, whether they're recently deceased or it's Droga crawling up out of the mounds all bony and fucked up.
Hopefully that doesn't happen now.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed.
This would be the place, right? But hey, if you defeat him, you're gonna get an awesome sword out of it. So there's that.
I wouldn't say no, but once I'm up, I'm kind of gonna very much be at the mercy of the gods and the Veter of the land. So there is a certain intention to try and appease them and acknowledge them that I don't normally belong in that space, and I'm only visiting and trying to create I suppose like the right sort of ritual mindset, because it's as much about preparing the body, which we'll get to, as it is about preparing the mind. So the way I build these rituals up is I take aspects and descriptions from saga literature, from Eddic poetry, and then look at, so what does the material record, the archaeology tell us? We look at Lada or Hofstad in Iceland, there's lots of severed heads, animal bones, these sorts of things, and then looking at the bodies as well. And trying to piece together an approximation of what we think it might have looked like, and then doing my own thing with it as well. Playing with elements that are familiar from the historical record, the mythological record, and then making that make sense for my particular personal circumstances.
So, what's the ritual going to look like itself? How much can you tell us beforehand, I guess?
Yeah. All right. So
you don't have to go into.
No. I won't delve into it too much. So there's
give us the exclusives. It's all right.
There will be a ring of skulls and bones.
Okay.
Initially, all right. So this is like the warding ring. So this is the enclosure to contain the energy, to create a space for me to feel comfortable to basically wander away without drugs.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Yes, drugs are very, very bad. I've got two of Vicky's mates who were just lovely. So Brigitte and Pierre, they're doing drumming, so that's going to help with creating a wall of sound. Okay. So droning, intonation. So looking at taking different sort of shamanistic techniques. So initially there'll be some invocations in Old Norse, sort of, sanctify and make sacred the space. Okay. Try and call upon the All Father. So, hunger good, God of the hung. And from there there'll be a shedding. So I have like a wizard robe thing, a shaman's cloak. Yeah. Made it myself. It's pretty dodgy, but the idea is the idea is to initially approach as an unknown. Right. So the idea. So part of it's me. It's a very personal thing, offering myself up to Odin for all of the ways in which I feel he's enriched and enhanced my life and given me cognitive, memory, passion, poetry, all of these different capabilities that perhaps I lacked as a much younger man.
So as a tangent, when you've done this before, have you always had an audience, or is this the first time with a?
No, I have all of the times have been with an audience. This will be the most personal Norsified version of it. Okay. But there's always been things that I've done like inherently as an individual to try and make it my experience. I don't necessarily like engaging with the crowd, only because all ritual carries a certain amount of performance, right? It's as much about the individual practitioner as it is about coming into the community. And we see this in a lot of the historical stuff that discusses it. You've got personal private rituals for, it's just you and me, we're hanging out, we're having family dinner. We've got the thing we do there for our household, for our space. And there's even acknowledgements during the conversion period and after, where there's a Christian bishop, and he's going around and he's visiting the farmsteads, and he goes to go into this one, and they're like, well, no, we're conducting a private heathen set of rites here, because we don't know you, because you're not established and familiar with not just you know, the Veitara of the area, the land spirits of the area, but with our personal gods within our home. Like, this is a sacred space for us. You're actually not coming in, mate. You know?
Yeah.
Or the most polite way of saying get fucked.
Yeah. In a culture that otherwise, you know, would invite you in.
Absolutely, yeah. The laws of hospitality, I think, are quite extensive. You know, it's an honor-based culture, and those sorts of things are very important.
Yeah. I think it's fair to remember as well, rituals don't have to be hanging yourself from a tree.
No.
Like, we all have our own rituals that we do, like, on a daily basis, where, you know, we do things a certain way, or we have to do things before you know, everyone has their own little quirks, whether it's lucky socks, lucky pants, or whatever. Everyone has that little thing that they have to do.
Objects.
But like Eddie, the guy that works for the company, like, he has these little things where every time he locks the business, he has to like check the door 4 times. 4 times exactly, every single time, like, to make, and it's like little things like that. That's like his little ritual he does. Every time he leaves, checks the door 4 times. Right. And we all have like these little things, I assume, that we have through our lives.
So, you gave a talk earlier here at Midgardsblot, at the Mimir Talks, and that was a really fascinating conversation. Similar things that we're talking about now, of course. And you got into the subject of like knowledge from the dead, and also this is, of course, in the self-hanging ritual that Odin performs in Rúnatal in Hávamál. We're supposed to understand that he dies and receives knowledge.
Where are you going with this? Please, don't bring this.
It's fine. I've already died once. This is the second.
So what a lot of these rituals do is tampering essentially with this, like, the limits between life and death.
Yeah, absolutely. So so the idea of it's a shame you weren't at the talk, but that's cool. So
don't out me like that on my own podcast.
Actually, he was still drunk.
So one of the examples that I used as a sort of a reference piece. So in Vafthrudnismal, Odin is so he goes to the Jotun Vafthrud, and he has, you know, a battle of the wits. You know, like, let's see who is the wisest of all, and the winner gets to keep his head. He gets to leave the hall alive. So there's a lot of really interesting ideas and concepts in that particular poem. So looking at the laws of hospitality, you know, this is this is a probably like a very significant player in terms of you know, power structures and hierarchy for the Jotun, you know, because he's still alive after their entire regime has been displaced by Odin and the Aesir. And so Odin is going into hostile territory to visit a hostile ruler in a hostile ruler's realm to do cognitive battle with him. And so he acknowledges that, you know, there's something here I need to know about, and I have no other mechanism for obtaining it. So I'm willing to put my life on the line and cross the boundary between, you know, the world that I've created, that is a world of order and rules and structure, and I'm going into this sort of no man's land where there's no guarantee I'm going to come back again.
No, I just wanted to add, this is also highlighted in the beginning of the poem, because Frigg is actually worried about Odin going there, so she knows what's going on, right? She knows. That's a really interesting interpretation of what is actually happening in Vafthrudnismal, because I feel like there's a lot of scholars who haven't been successful at really explaining the situation, you know, and I feel that if you look at it in terms of a ritual where, you know, you're putting yourself on the line like that, then it makes a lot of sense what's actually going on there.
That's not to say I'm right, but, you know, that's based on, you know, the places and the frames of mind that I like to explore and wander through. Yeah. That's the one that makes the most sense for me. So when you were talking before about, you know, it doesn't have to be like up on hooks or, you know, like cutting your own hands off or your own eye out or whatever. Absolutely, and I was at pains to sort of, and I don't know that I successfully articulated that in the talk, but to try and communicate that. Yeah, like it's for the individual practitioner, it's really up to you to decide what level you're comfortable with, what makes sense for you in terms of your circumstances. I mean, I would love to go and slaughter 90 head of oxen to like really honor the gods, but like, I've got 3 kids and a mortgage. I can't fucking afford 90 oxen. So it's partly about working within your own limitations, but then also understanding that there are some borders and some boundaries that like you have to be willing to break.
You could start a GoFundMe for that stuff, right?
Buy me my oxen. I will start my farm.
Okay, so
You feed people with the oxen. I feel like maybe you could get the support.
None of it will go to waste.
a lot of this makes a lot of sense to me because you know, in a world that has been created through the slaughter of a being, right? Ritual sacrifice in one way or another, spilling blood becomes integral to maintaining that world order. That's what we see in the creation story, at least in for instance, in Vathrunismal, it's referenced there. We have it in Grimnismal, and then of course Snorri Sturluson's version in the prose Edda. And this brings me to this subject again of like retrieving knowledge and gaining access to knowledge. The myth of the meat of poetry is a great example of how sacrifice and knowledge come together. And you know, we have Kvasir, who is this man that has been created from the spittle of all the gods, and he is the wisest person on earth. And he goes through the entire cosmos. He visits with everybody, we're told, until he ends with the dwarves, and they kill him and drain him for blood.
Cheeky.
And then
Can't have anything nice.
and then, can't have anything nice. And then you get the meat of poetry out of that. So that is essentially explaining to us that you have to go underground where the dwarves live. You have to go to the underworld to retrieve knowledge. Death is part of retrieving that knowledge, and bloodletting is part of retrieving that knowledge. And so it essentially, in that sense, I'd say mimics aspects of the creation myth.
Well, the dead, I mean, I'm of the perspective, the dead actually tend to be quite reticent. You know, they want to, like we see in like the mythic corpus, they want to hold on to this knowledge. It's either in Voluspa or Voluspa and Skama, and the resurrected Volva actually sort of says, like, you know, I don't really want to get up, like I don't want to share this information, partly out of, you know, obviously a lot of bad shit will go down if she does, but I've always been fascinated by the idea too that what further price is there for the dead to pay if they reveal their secrets? And unfortunately, you know, we don't really have anything that sort of speaks to that.
Right, they're dead. We can't go after them. Well, at least not without a ritual. No, that's a good point, but it also highlights the danger involved, right? And the risk involved when you put yourself through these types of rituals, right? And I remember at the talk there was somebody who was talking about how they use water and mead in rituals, and I was thinking that it's actually quite interesting to see how water, mead, and blood are commutable substances. For instance, in the creation myth and the myth of the mead of poetry as well. So it looks like, you know, because like water, for instance, is called, especially the ocean is referred to as like Eemia's blood, and the wound juice of Eemia and stuff like that. So
Raven wine.
Yes. So they knew this. They had thought about these things in those terms, I would say, in many ways. So this makes perfect sense to me.
I can't remember what I'm going to say this. You said moon juice, right?
Wound.
Oh, I thought you said womb juice. I thought it was womb juice, and I was like, that's
still elemental.
I was like, that's a very descriptive way to put it. I was like, I get it, but it's.
But what the hell?
Yeah, it's like that's not how I describe it.
How better to sluice the entryway for the new world.
I mean, yeah.
Boom.
I don't think we're never going to get a date after this.
So I think like we've alluded to it a little bit, but not spoken about the actual hanging. How's that going to work? Because you're not going to hang yourself by your neck. Obviously.
No. So there is the very significant acknowledgement, like I am but a mere mortal, and kind of only like a bit of an excuse for one of that. Sometimes.
You would like to go home.
I would like to go home. I've got 3 amazing children back home, and I work and all that other jazz.
Yeah.
So this is where I suppose we sort of, in talking about the ways in which, we explore risk, we confront risk, we engage with it, but it has to be on your terms. Like Odin is, he's a god, and particularly, and this is one of the things I find so wonderful about his story, is that he's, as a psychopomp, he's a god of the dead, but then after Ragnarok, he becomes at least I think, he becomes a dead god. I discussed this with Jonas and Terry last year in Reykjavik. And Jonas says, oh no, sort of that's, one and done, or words to that effect. Whereas Terry's much more of the perspective that, these sort of later folkloric legends about Oscar, the Wild Hunt, the central figure leading that is so easily identifiable with Odin. And I like the idea that, he's given so much to try and preserve Asgard and Midgard and try and, hang on to the order and the civilization and culture he's built, that even in giving like the ultimate sacrifice of himself to Fenrir is he dies in battle, not all of him, but parts of him continue on, elements, not in the entirety, he's probably like the remnants of what he was, but there's elements of that energy still sort of coursing around.
No, that's so great. Like that fits again with the creation myth. I'd like to come back to that, right?
Yeah.
Because like that used to be an assembled body that existed, and then it's, taken apart, and those remnants still exist. That's the soil, right?
Yeah.
That's the trees, that's the sky, it's all of it. No, it makes perfect sense. I like that interpretation a lot.
But I want to know how you're going to hang yourself.
Yes, okay, sorry.
We want to get to the gruesome bit.
All right, so the body is prepared through various mechanisms. Mm-hmm. We take stainless steel, like surgical cylinders, right? And they're sort of cut off at like a 45-degree angle. Okay. And they're sort of chamfered and sterilized and whatever else. So they take the flesh and they pull it forward, and they pierce through. Okay. And then that creates a funnel. They follow that through with the actual hook. So normally I go up on chamfered polished shark hooks, but there's some really cool nifty new rigging that one of the BME guys came up with, and Al, we've
tried it before. It's not the first time.
Yeah. So he said, oh look, we might try these ones because it's a little bit less. Little bit less pressure around the edges of the entry and exit wounds.
Don't listen to anyone that says we might try this.
Yeah,
it has to be like we've tried this before.
They've played with them before. I've never used them on my own form, but I'm a bit of an adventurer, guys. So
okay.
So they pass through the hooks. Then that gets connected to rigging. They've got a whole like pulley and tensioned off strap system affixed to the beams in Guildholland. So we were originally going to use a tree, very much for So there's some logistics.
Okay.
Incongruencies, we'll say. So a stage got erected perhaps a little bit too close to one of the trees. Okay. And then the other spot's covered in ants and the branches look a little bit flimsy, and I'm not really keen on, falling from 3 meters and smashing my knees out. Got a lot of hiking to do here in Norway before I head back. So it's been shifted into Guildhall. No, same here. But having said that, so at first there's like, we planned on the tree, it was going to be like a really nice, like natural elemental motif. And obviously perfect for Runetal, emulative of Yggdrasil, the Great Ash. But the Gyllenhaal is still constructed from timber.
And it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. But I also really like the idea of, the sense of experience and immersion that comes from, one, the community, obviously. But two, the old cult houses. So Saxo, Adam of Bremen. I think there's even something in Theodoricus about the idea that. So if we go back to the old Roman sources, Tacitus in his Germania is like quite emphatic, they're all woolly-bully wild Germans and they worship these funny gods and they only ever do it outside. They have no temples, they have no sacred houses, which is, I think, kind of like a fairly big amount of bullshit, because we've got enough there in the archaeological record to indicate that there were cult houses, not necessarily huge and not necessarily everywhere,
right.
but there's enough there. So the idea of sort of like my own personal sort of Gamla Uppsala is so there's a lot of appeal to that.
I imagine you get a nice atmosphere inside as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Like it's going to intensify all the emotions, all the feelings.
It'll trap
it's gonna
the sound,
it
it'll trap the energy. So, I mean, if you think about it, when you go to a gig, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you go to a big stadium gig and you see Iron Maiden or someone and they're brilliant, but there's a little bit of a disconnect.
Oh, yeah.
If you're in a room with like 200 people and they're this far away and you can see the perspiration, and you can see sometimes like that sense of otherness, that sense of like odra, the ecstatic passion that comes across them, and to be able to feed into that energy and play off it and use it is also a big part of this ritual. I can't get there on my own.
No, I totally agree, and I think speaking of Iron Maiden, that's probably one of the most boring and disappointing concerts I've ever been to. So I agree.
So how many hooks do they use?
Just two.
Just two?
Just two.
Fuck me, I don't think there'll have enough hooks for
There's
me.
a weight. There is a weight to tensile strength ratio that needs to be observed, because you're talking about surface area. There was a guy many years ago. I did one back home in this. It's this lovely sort of park area near where I live called Black Button. They've got like an animal sanctuary there now, wetlands. It's awesome. It's really, really, really lovely. And we picked a tree there, and there was a more beefy gentleman. I was quite rail thin then.
Look at Matthias when you say this. It's not me.
He's very tall.
He was
a bigger guy. And look, he gave it his all, and he got up on his tiptoes, and in the end, it was so intense, he actually could not willingly lift his own feet off the ground, and he was shattered. He walked away really immensely disappointed, because he knew how much the experience meant to him, and I think he had a reasonably good idea of what he was going to get out of it, and to not be able to follow through is, it's.
I imagine it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So do you just get hoisted up, or do you make the conscious choice to lift your feet?
That's a very intentional and deliberate thing. And so plug for Smurfkirken. They are Norway's greatest practitioners of suspension work.
What a fucking name that
know,
is.
it's so good.
Pain Church, yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Because just hearing it in English, I'm like, that's a Smurfkirken? I'm like, what the fuck is that?
Alan, they're just the most lovely people, and they're very accomplished, very experienced practitioners. They know their stuff, which is why I'm really comfortable about doing it with them. But yeah,
I just had a vision of them like pulling you up, even if you were like kicking and screaming. It's like, fucking, you're going up there.
So they're really good, because they've spent a lot of time, like we've been zooming back and forth, because I've been home in Australia, discussing, okay, what's the space, like what are the steps, like what do each of the rites look like, hand signals,
don't change
safety
the location
signals.
days before you're meant to do it.
Yeah, that's all right. But they were cool. They were just able to roll with it. Yep, sweet, no worries.
Good.
Cool.
Sounds fun.
It does.
Welcome to try.
Maybe. Matthias, last thing. Do we know how Odin hanged himself? Does it say specifically by the neck, or could it be something like this?
This has been a long conversation between nitpicky scholars for a couple of 100 years. Like, there are those who believe that this hanging is essentially just like a Nordic version of Jesus on the cross, which I can't say that I support.
Yeah.
Even if it is in some ways borrowed, like the motif of a god hanging on something is borrowed from good old Jesus. It has definitely gotten an entirely different context. In Nordic mythology. And then there's the this funny, usually it's philologists. So these guys who spend a lot of time reading books in an armchair and never really getting out there among the people, who have been discussing, well, does he hang in his feet or does he hang by his neck? Because he reaches down and takes up the runes. So that's got to mean that he's hanging upside down so that he can reach down. And it's like, guys, do you think it really matters what the physical limitations are here? We're dealing with a god hanging on a tree, going through this ritual and everything.
Well, it's also a metaphysical space. Like the idea that it's, you know, there's not just like some carved runes sitting there on the ground.
No,
like the idea that he's taking up knowledge, not necessarily like a corporeal physical object.
Exactly, and also like if we're rolling with the sort of like the logics of all of this, is like, well, who put the runes there in the first place? Was it Carl over there in the corner? It's like, oh, you've been there long enough, so now I'm going to put the runes here.
He's met the criteria. Yeah, here you go.
Yeah, but that's sort of like the curious discussions you get in the field of Old Norse philology in particular.
I feel there's something much more cool hanging by hooks out of your chest there. And like, I've never thought that, like, that could be something similar for like Odin, like hanging with these hooks, and it's metal.
It's pretty fucking metal, man.
Better than neck or feet, I guess.
Well, if you unpack, it's covered in the talk. So some of the word choices, the conjugations of the verbs around it indicate, there's this sense. He's talking about Yggdrasil, and it's a lot of the translators go to the windy tree, and then when they use heck for hanging or hung in the past tense. I think it creates a really nice sort of visuospatial, like a mental picture. He's swaying, and that motif there we see in other saga literature when they talk about, like, actually say, I put a noose around his neck and I'd hung him dead. The punishment for outlaws, Skogamata, etc., etc. You're on display, and it's just your corpse sort of swaying in the breeze. Yeah. So I'm very much of the perspective. No, he was proper. Like he is the gallow god. He's the gallow wrought. Even Yggdrasil is the steed or the horse or the gallows of the terrible one.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think that's a good note to end on. The gallows of the terrible one. That's pretty metal.
It is, yeah. Thank you very much.
Very well.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Our first remote guest, I guess. We're trying out some new stuff. Hopefully it's good. And you'll have to come join us properly. I say properly. The old-fashioned Zoom way.
For a longer talk.
Would love to.
Yeah, when you're back, we
guys.
can have beer. I know you're fasting right now before the.
I'm so hungry.
So we can. Is that so you don't put on weight so the hooks don't break? Just in case you have like a big meal beforehand. Come and talk to us. We'll have a longer chat and, like I say, have a drink and hang out a little bit more.
I'll be looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We'll let you go prepare.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
And there we go.
Yeah.
Cool.